So now we look at a new chapter, Structural Change of Book 2. To understand the present, we need to know a bit about the past, as it puts things into perspective. For understanding modern India, we need to study the impact of colonial rule. Colonial rule resulted in the exposure to modern ideas and institutions. Yet, this interaction was contradictory or paradoxical. How, you might ask? Well, Western ideas of nationalism, liberalism, freedom, democratic rights were only applicable for the Western world and the Westerners, and were practically non-existent for the Indians living under colonial rule. These and other contradictions are responsible for shaping many structural and cultural changes in India. So, let's first try to understand what is colonialism. Colonialism is the establishment of rule by one country over another. That is, there is political rule and economic exploitation in it. So we see colonialism as a structure as well as a system. How, you might ask? Well, colonialism brought new political changes, like, for example, number one, the parliamentary system, the legal system, the educational system, and the maintenance of law and order through a police force. All these are the political changes. Number two, economic changes. By economic changes, I'm talking about the transformation of the Indian economy from a primarily agrarian one to a market-based system and with a capitalist mode of economic production. The social structural changes, we can say, are industrialization coupled with urbanization. So this is the structural aspect of colonization. How is it a system, you might wonder? Well, this was a system of exerting territorial power brought through the maintenance of political, social, economic, and cultural domination over a long period of time. Note, all these structural changes were accompanied by cultural changes, and they go hand in hand. Like, for example, driving on the left side of the road or eating cutlets, etc. So the next question arises is that wasn't there any annexation of territory and domination in the past? Yes, there was. But there's a vast difference. The pre-capitalist conquerors, through their dominance, benefited by ensuring a continuous flow of tribute or gifts, so as to speak. On the whole, they did not interfere with the economic base and entitled themselves to the economic surplus. In contrast, the British colonialists, based on capitalist system, ensured for themselves the greatest possible profit and benefit. How, you might wonder? Well, they simply changed the laws of the country. They decided on the ownership of land. They decided the type of crops to be grown. They decided the way goods were going to be manufactured and distributed. And they also enacted laws like the Forest Acts. So the question arises is, what effect would that have had on the Indian society? Well, for one, this led to considerable movement of people from one part of India to another. For example, there was movement of people from Jharkhand to Assam for taking up work in the tea plantations. Also, there was movement of people from the British presidencies of Bengal and Madras, and the emergence of a new middle class of professionals like doctors and lawyers, and also government employees. And last, there was movement of people out of India in the form of bonded laborers to other colonized lands of Asia, Africa, and the Americas. So the question is, what are the basic features of colonialism? Well, first and foremost, it is an economic system where the means of production are privately owned and profit making is the sole criteria. It is the system of capitalism, so as to speak. Capitalism was basically an unprecedented plunder of wealth and resources of the colonies under the colonial rulers. Secondly, there was an unparalleled growth of science and technology's use for increasing the productivity in the agriculture and industrial sphere, which was not so in the past. Third, the use of labor in the best possible way for ensuring the greatest profit. Number 4, the global nature of capitalism, in the sense that Western colonialism was connected to Western capitalism and it spread to other parts of the world. Number 5, the becoming of nation states as the dominant political form and the rise of nationalism. The people of the world having a nationality, citizenship, and belonging to a particular nation. The ideology of sovereignty, liberalism, democratic rights was only applicable for the Western colonial rulers. The colonies, among them India, were quick to pick up this contradiction and thus initiate the struggle for their freedom and independence. So now let's move on to urbanization and industrialization. Let's just first define the terms. Industrialization means number 1, the use of machines for the production process, and number 2, the use of inanimate energy or power resources like steam or electricity. So what we see is that industrialization transformed the economic activity landscape. How? Well, more and more people moved to work in the factories and offices and shops as compared with agriculture. The question arises is, what is urbanization? Well, it is the population shift from rural to urban areas. Why? Well, because these people are in search of job opportunities. Now note that urbanization and industrialization often occur together, but not always. Let's discuss. Now, Britain was the first society to undergo industrialization and also the earliest one to become urbanized. Our industrialization and urbanization was governed by colonial interests, and so in British India, industrialization led to deindustrialization in some sectors and a decline of old urban centers. There came a decline in the exports of silk and cotton from India. There was also a decline of cities such as Surat and Masulipatam. It also led to deurbanization as more people moved back into agriculture initially. Now this is all as per census of 1911. So the extensive import of cheap European goods and the establishment of factories on the Western model completely destroyed the Indian village industry. This, coupled with the high prices of agricultural produce, made the village artisans shift to agriculture in order to subsist for themselves and their families. So, we can see urbanization and industrialization did not occur together in the Indian context. So, with industrialization, there emerged new social groups in the society, that is, the working class, the middle class, and a new social relationship. Cities such as Mumbai, Kolkata, and Chennai, being coastal cities, grew as they connected India with Britain and were perfect for the smooth transition of exporting resources and importing manufactured goods. So, what were the unintended consequences of industrialization under colonial rule for the Indians? Well, there was a rise of the zamindars with the system of land ownership, and these zamindars were disinterested in the growth of agricultural production and the cultivators' growth. Secondly, the facilities for English medium education gave rise to a group of unemployed graduates. Now, let's have a look at one industry under colonial rule, that is, the tea plantation or the tea industry. From official reports and from fictional and other accounts, we get to know number one, that how colonial government used unfair means to hire and forcibly keep the workers on the plantation. Secondly, harsh measures were used against the Indian laborers that weren't allowed in Britain. That is, they were unthinkable as they were a violation of the rights of the workers. Third, the Indian laborers were underpaid laborers who worked overtime. Essentially, these laborers were indentured, meaning that they were in debt and under contract for a time period. As they were forced to work off that debt, they had been duped by the contractors who brought them to work on the tea estate. Once on the tea plantation, they were not allowed to leave as the tea plantation owners persuaded the British colonial government to aid and abet them in passing penal laws. There was no financial compensation or incentives given to these laborers in Assam. This is the sad state or plight of the workers in Assam. Now let's look at the lives of the plantation owners. Well, they lived a life of luxury. Basically, they lived like royalty. So now we move on to industrialization in independent India. So, post independence, the issue in the forefront for the nationalist was the question of handling the centuries of economic exploitation that was suffered by India. And they were looking for a solution. And what was the solution? Well, rapid industrialization of the economy as the path towards growth and social equity, brought through three things. That is, one, through the setting up of heavy industries, two, through the expansion of the public sector, and number three, through the increased role of the cooperative sector. So this threefold method was to be used in order to bring about economic growth and social equity in post-independence India. I would like to draw the attention to Mr. Nehru's vision of modern India that was to be built of an edifice of giant steel plants or gigantic dams and power stations. So now let's move on to the last subsection, urbanization in independent India. M.S.A. Rao studied urbanization in the first 2 decades of independence and found that many villages all over India were under the influence of urbanization. But the nature of urban impact varies according to the relations a village has with a city or town. So he came up with 3 different situations of urban impact. One, In the first situation, there are a large number of people who have sought employment in far off cities, either in India or abroad. Now they leave behind their family members in the hometown. These people have done significantly well, and we find that they have really wonderful houses in their hometown, and they've invested their money on land and industries and have donated to the educational institutions of India and to various other trusts. The second kind of urban impact is seen in villages which are near an industrial town. Like, for example, Bhilai, when it came up in the middle of villages, some villages were totally uprooted while the other villages' land was taken over by the industrial town. So there was an influx of immigrant workers, which was good for the village as it boosted the economy by increasing a demand for houses and a market inside the village, but also caused a change in the social relationships between the native residents and the immigrants. The third type is the growth of metropolitan cities. And when this happens, the nearby villages get totally absorbed in the process of expansion of the cities. So these were the three different situations of urban impact. Now let's look at how globalization has affected urbanization and the growth of cities in the present time. So, the concept of smart city has led to the enormous expansion and change of cities in India. So, question arises is, what is a smart city? Well, it is a city which has an increasing connectedness. That is, there is a heavy reliance on automation and the Internet of Things that collects electronic data about people and infrastructure, and this helps in improving the efficiency and the quality of life of the people. So the census data points to increase in urban population and in the urban agglomerations. For the first time since independence, the absolute increase in population is more in urban areas than in rural areas. Why? Well, this is due to a sharp decline in the growth rate in rural areas, while the growth rate in urban areas remains almost the same. So, in conclusion, I would just like to say, according to Worth, industrialization and urbanization imply changes not just in production systems, technological innovations, density of settlements, but also a way of life.